Hello everyone, and welcome back to my channel. I hope y'all are doing well. In today's video, I'm going to be doing a summer reading wrap up. I'm not going to be talking about every single book that I read this past summer, just 4 books that I wanted to talk about. Yeah, thank you so much for being here on my channel, and thank you so much for 3,000 subscribers. It's very crazy to me that potentially thousands of people could be watching this and looking at my messy bed right now. How much can you see of my bed? Oh, not that much. It's fine. But yeah, thank you so much for being here on my channel. I love and appreciate every single one of you. I'm giving you all a gentle kiss on the forehead. Thank you. So the first book that I wanted to talk about is She Who Became the Sun by Shelby Parker Chan. I really enjoyed this book. It's been described as a cross between a song for Achilles and Mulan, which I haven't read A Song for Achilles, but I am familiar with Mulan. Thank you to Disney. I would say that the Mulan comparison is pretty apt. I found it really fascinating. I think that a lot of times when we talk about gender, it feels like a very modern conversation, and that like historically people have always just fit into a gender binary. But I think the truth is that, you know, people have always been existed outside of that binary, and really I think it's not a modern conversation at all. So I really appreciated the context of exploring gender identity in a more historical context, albeit obviously like a historical fantasy context. But regardless, I found it really fascinating. So the book itself, the main character basically watches her brother and father die these incredibly violent and brutal deaths. You know, they live in this very poor village that's been stricken with drought and famine, and they're starving, they're dying, and bandits attack and kill her father, and her brother dies of just starvation. And she realizes that her only chance at survival is to assume her brother's identity and become a monk. And I really find Changba to be a fascinating character because obviously she has this incredibly tragic and violent past, but she is very like lighthearted almost at times, and like a very upbeat character, surprisingly. And I just really enjoyed reading her perspective, and she's this very shrewd and intense character, and I just found these different like sort of balancing character traits to be really fascinating to read. It's basically like about her deciding that she's meant for greatness and then just like making that happen. And yeah, I really enjoyed this book. And I also think that if you are a fan of Malazan, which I know a lot of my subscribers are, I think you'll absolutely love She Who Became the Sun. There's a lot of military sort of strategy and tactics that I think Malazan fans will appreciate in this book, and the sort of dry sense of humor interspersed with like very intense violent scenes, I like sort of balanced out, if you know what I mean. Like I think that Malazan fans will find that familiar from Malazan in this book, if that makes sense. And yeah, I think there were a lot of elements in this book that just reminded me of Erickson's work in a really good way. If you're looking for a fast-paced military historical fantasy that sort of explores gender and is just very violent and brutal, but also surprisingly upbeat and really funny at times, I think you'll really enjoy She Who Became the Sun. And so the Jasmine Throne follows Priya and Malini. They're like kind of the two central characters of this book. And so Malini is an imperial princess, and her brother, the emperor, is kind of an asshole. So he basically orders Malini and her 2 best friends to burn themselves like alive in an act of religious piety. And obviously Malini is like, I'm not gonna do that. That sounds terrible. And the emperor is like, well, if you're not going to do that, I'm going to imprison you in a faraway country that the empire has conquered. And so Malini gets sent away to this faraway country, and she is imprisoned in this temple. And basically Priya is a housemaid at the palace where the temple is located. And, you know, through the twist of fate, their paths cross, and they end up sort of like entering into a sort of very interesting relationship. My favorite aspect of the Jasmine Throne was definitely the power dynamic between Priya and Malini, because in a lot of ways their relationship is kind of like a microcosm for the relationship between the empire and this sort of the country that they're occupying, because obviously Malini is a princess, an imperial princess. She is like inherently powerful because of that, but at the same time she's been stripped of all that power and removed from court, so really she has no power in this situation and she's a prisoner. And Priya, despite being a maid, has a lot of power. And in fact, over the course of the novel, we learn that she might even have like supernatural abilities that we learn about over the course of the book. And yeah, I found it really interesting because, as Malini and Priya get to know one another, they really have to sort of like grapple with that. So yeah, the relationship between Priya and Malini is definitely like the centerpiece of the novel. And then I have to say that I have read a lot of fantasy books at this point, and it takes a lot for me to be surprised or intrigued by a magic system. As once you've read enough fantasy books, you've kind of seen it all. The magic in the Jasmine Throne just felt so incredibly ancient and elemental and cosmic in the best way possible. And I just absolutely loved it. This book felt like a gothic novel. Like a lot of the tropes of a gothic novel present itself in this book, but instead of like a European setting that you're normally used to, like Haunting of Bly Manor vibes, it was a like ancient Indian temple. And I will say it is kind of like slow burn, slow paced, so it's not for everyone. I can see like I don't think everyone will love it as much as I did, but I do think that the chapters are quite short and there's constantly something happening. So even though the overall plot moves slowly, it's because there's so many threads going into it and it's a lot of different character points of view. I did say that Malini and Priya's relationship was like the centerpiece of the novel, but there are other characters, and very, very good characters. I have to say, Lady Bhumika is another sort of secondary character that I absolutely loved. And I really hope that future books focus more on Lady Bhumika, because I think she's a fantastic character. And yeah, I think that this book was just a great exploration of like imperialism and just romance. The romance in this book was fantastic as well. And yeah, I highly recommend The Jasmine Throne. I don't think it's for everyone. If you're not looking for something slow burn, you probably won't enjoy it. But if you are in the mood for like something a little different from the normal fantasy, like medieval fantasy vibe, I definitely think The Jasmine Throne is a good way to go. All right, let's talk about the book that I didn't like. It was The Blacktongue Thief by Christopher Buehlman. So let's start with the stuff that I did like about this book. I think the audiobook was fantastic. The author is the narrator for the audiobook, and he did a really great job of doing different accents and like voices. And I believe there was like another person who did singing for the book, which was super interesting. And yeah, I just really liked the oral experience of the book was super fun. But that's about all. That's like about the extent of fun that I had with this book. I'd say like the first 30% I just outright hated. I couldn't stand the main character at all. And I hated the first 30%. The next like 60 to 70 to 80% I tolerated. Like I thought it was okay. And then like the last 20 to 10%, I was like, okay, this is actually pretty good. Does that even add up to 100? I don't know. But you get the gist. Like the large majority of it I tolerated, and a very small minority of it like I actually enjoyed. If you're like at 80% of the book and you just start like kind of caring for the characters, at that point I don't think it's good writing. It's just Stockholm syndrome. The reason I picked up this book was because Robin Hobb recommended it on NetGalley, and I was like, oh my God, Robin Hobb. I love Robin Hobb. I live and die by Robin Hobb. I will read anything that you tell me to read. But now I'm kind of like, you know what? Maybe I shouldn't pay attention to Robin Hobb blurbs because this book was really terrible. Let me back up a little bit. I've said it's terrible several times now. Let me talk about why. So the first sort of 30% of this book was just really gross because the main character just kept running into like naked women for no reason. And it was just like, why is he coming into contact with so many naked women, and why am I having to read this? Like it was just genuinely like like, I didn't care about the character at all. I found him utterly uncharming, which is a shame because I think he's supposed to be this like charismatic scoundrel type, like Matt Cawthon, and it just didn't work in this case because there's the scene where the main character goes to the bathhouse and then he spies on a woman while she bathes, kind of like justifies this to himself by saying that she's a soldier, so it would be okay for her to be like naked in front of someone else. But at the same time, I was just listening to it going like, but yeah, you're still spying on her while she's taking a bath. Like, just because she's a soldier doesn't make it okay. Like, it was just like this really weird scene, and after that I just couldn't take the main character seriously. I was just like, you're kind of weird and gross, but I'm supposed to find you charming and like funny, and I just didn't. This book was definitely like trying to be really snarky and like bantery, and it didn't work. I found it utterly uninteresting and unfunny, and it was awful. I hated it. To be honest, the last 10% of this book kind of finally won me over because it didn't have any of like the male gazy, weird, voyeuristic parts that the beginning was plagued with. And I do have to say that like I think Buellman has interesting world building ideas, and especially the lore of the world and all the gods were like super interesting. But as I grow older, I find myself having little patience for books where the male gaze is so heavily pronounced, and I just find it, I just have no patience for it. And I honestly wouldn't have finished the book if I hadn't wanted to like talk about it on my channel. I did want to like give it a fair shot before I, sort of said I hated it. But yeah, I don't recommend The Blacktongue Thief by Christopher Buellman, unfortunately. And then finally, the last book that I wanted to talk about is The Witness for the Dead by Catherine Addison. I read and loved The Goblin Emperor many years ago at this point, and I am happy to say that the second book in not the series, but this universe, they're both still standalones. So you can read either The Goblin Emperor or The Witness for the Dead without having read the other. But where was I going with that train of thought? Oh, the Goblin, not the Witness for the Dead definitely did live up to the hype of the Goblin Emperor for me. I will say that The Witness for the Dead is definitely not for everyone. It's not a book that will please, it's not like a crowd pleaser by any means, and it is very much like this very intimate sort of character study novel. It's a murder mystery, and in that regard it really reminded me of Fugitive Telemetry by Martha Wells, which is the latest murder bot that just came out. And yeah, in the same way that Fugitive Telemetry is more about the person doing the investigation rather than the investigation itself, The Witness for the Dead is a lot like that, where, Selahar, the main character, has this ability to communicate with the dead with some limitations. He can't just like willy-nilly talk to ghosts all the time. There's limitations to what he can do. But basically, he can talk to the dead, and because of this, he has this like sort of weird position where it's like a religious but also like governmental position. So he, will do stuff like perform funerary rites, but at the same time, he'll do stuff like, validating wills and like finding out like what people actually wanted for their inheritance and stuff like that. Does that make sense? He is investigating this murder. This opera singer was killed in a very disreputable part of the city, and he's trying to figure out what happened to her. But at the same time, it's more about us learning about Selahar and how he, is this very like excluded person in society, because of his ability to communicate with the dead. Naturally, a lot of people are just like very suspicious of him, and they don't like him because he just like puts people on edge. And it really reminded me of like Murderbot. No one knows how to treat it, so they kind of just treat it badly a lot of the times. And it's the same thing with Selahar, and it's honestly really heart-wrenching at times because outwardly he doesn't really let it show, but from his inner monologue you can really tell that the way people treat him like really affects him, and it makes him feel so lonely, and it's just heart-wrenching to read. But at the same time, this book has a very like, it has like this very optimistic trend of hopefulness. And throughout the novel, you kind of realize that, yeah, a lot of people treat him awfully, but there's a lot of people out there that look out for him and care for him as a person. So yeah, I really loved this book. I just love Catherine Addison's writing. I find it to be very meditative and just very cathartic to read. And I love this book. I also think that if you're in the mood for like something spooky in the month of October, but you don't want to read like gory slasher or like something super scary that will like make you upset and not be able to sleep at night, this is a great book. There are like some spooky elements to this book because, you know, Selahar can talk to the dead. So there's like ghosts and whatnot involved in the story. It's not a ghost story, but it is like very spooky adjacent. So if you're in the mood for something like that, I definitely think this is a perfect book for like the fall vibes. I could imagine myself like cuddling up and having like a pumpkin spice latte while I reread this book. So yeah, I definitely enjoyed The Witness for the Dead. It's very slow paced, definitely a very intimate character study kind of book. So if you're in the mood for that, I think it's perfect for you. But yeah, thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed me rambling about books for however long this video ends up being. But yeah, let me know, what did you read this past summer? What were your favorite books and what were your least favorite books? I hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you again for 3,000 subscribers. I love each and every single one of you, and I will see you in the next video. Until then, take care. Bye.